The pews. A most outrageous proceeding. That was the reaction to the reordering of the church undertaken by the Reverend Henry Thomas Ellacombe in 1822, soon after his arrival in Bitton as the incumbent curate. Before 1822, St Mary's had had high box pews with double seats facing each other. Private domains, which were part of the village hierarchy. Prominent families had their own pews, for which they paid a rent to the vicar. Cutting down the pews and dividing them so that everyone faced forward must have been quite a shock, not least because Bitton was one of the first churches in the neighbourhood to make the change, and because it was so different from what had gone before, with the wealthy exposed to the general congregation. Facing forwards had the added significance that the congregation faced east, a sacred direction in the Christian church, symbolic of Christ coming out of the tomb. But it wasn't just the seating arrangements which Ellacombe changed. He moved the pulpit to its present position in the northeast corner of the nave, and he introduced chanting and music to the services. As far as Ellacombe was concerned, church attendance was not a social occasion, it was for worship. And worship of a particular kind, for he was in sympathy with the Oxford movement, the high church movement of the early 19th century, which looked towards the reintroduction of more ritual and symbolism, elements of worship that had been lost at the time of the Reformation. But the new pews were not a success. They were so narrow that it was almost impossible for worshippers to kneel. In 1869, Ellacombe's son, Canon Henry Nicholson Ellacombe, who had taken over from his father as vicar, launched an appeal to raise money for their improvement. They were widened and more generously spaced. Regrettably, the backs remained at stiff right angles. And in the 1870s, the carved pew ends, designed by Ellacombe, were added. They were carved by local craftsmen, probably led by Thomas Shepherd and William Shipp, who had already been commissioned to create choir stalls with bench ends of poppy heads and richly grained oak. Walk down the aisle and marvel at the relief carvings they made for the pew ends. Each is different, and each is an example of high craftsmanship. All have a plain border, except for one. Can you find it? Starting at the west end of the nave, facing each other, are two with coats of arms. The one with a bishop's mitre and two crossed keys is that of the Bishop of Gloucester and Bristol, which existed for a relatively short space of time as a single diocese in the 19th century. The other is the royal coat of arms, dating from the time of Queen Victoria. As for the rest, some of the patterns are geometric. Some have recognisable symbols, such as the Tudor rose and the fleur-de-lis. Several have circles suggesting eternal life, sometimes groups of three suggesting symbolism of the Trinity. All are detailed and intricate. When you've looked at them, decide which is your favourite. Oh, the one with a patterned border is on the separate stall for the vicar.